Today's episode is an exciting one because I had the unique opportunity to interview my friend and mental health colleague, Dr. Assadi, known as Dr. A, on campus where he works. He specializes in the intersection of masculinity and mental health. This conversation is fascinating and will help shed light for anyone who wants to help a man in their life. So welcome to the Suicide Prevention Lady podcast, where we make intervention easy. I'm your host, Dr. Ricky Turner, and I am a suicide intervention expert. Please take note, I am the thinky kind of doctor and not a medical professional. So please do not take anything in this podcast as medical advice. Hi, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. If you would just introduce yourself and what your role here is at the university.
Okay. My name's Assadi, but I go by Assadi or Dr. A, whatever's easier for people to say. And I'm the Director of Counseling Services here at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock.
Awesome. Okay. So for audience members, Assadi and I used to work together for like 10 years, something like that. And we worked really closely on responding to students who were in crisis. We worked on the behavior intervention team. We did all kinds of stuff together. So can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved in counseling in general? Like, how did you get started in this line of work?
Well, I come from a working class, first generation Middle Eastern background, and anyone that knows that demographic, education is like hammered. You got to go to school,
Right.
Because there wasn't that many opportunities in Iran where my parents were from. And that demographic only seems to know like 3 career paths, like doctor, engineer, lawyer, or like you didn't make it. Like there's like those only 3.
Sure.
So I told myself, okay, I'm gonna go pre-med because I'm not good at math and stuff like that as much as I should be to be an engineer, and the lawyer, I don't like conflict that much, So
Yeah.
I figured the doctor will be the way to go. And after you take a couple of upper level chemistry courses, you're like, okay, that's not for me. That's enough for me. I was struggling a lot in undergrad, just being a first generation college student and having all kinds of issues. And just luckily one day I walked by the TRIO department, the Student Support Services. And these ladies were out there. I remember, Miss May was her name, and they were passing out brochures and stuff like that, talking about first generation college students, which I didn't even know I was one.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what all that stuff meant. And she was just really instrumental in helping me.
Okay.
I made every mistake a first gen college student could make.
Yeah.
Just not going to class, not using resources that were out there.
Right.
And she really helped me. I ended up interning under her, and I always told myself I wanted to be like Miss May one day.
Okay.
And full circle moment, she actually came up here to UALR for a conference not too long ago. And I brought her in and gave her a tour. I'm like, hey, look, I told you.
That's so cool.
I run a counseling center.
That's so cool. All right. So you are the director of the counseling center. So from your perspective, what's going on with the group of students that are on campus now, mental health wise? What are they experiencing?
A lot of people are still, I know COVID seemed like forever ago. Like, we had so many things that had like, 2 proxy wars and all kinds of stuff happened. And so that seemed like, that's like, when was COVID? That's still like a long time ago. But I think that we're going to be talking about that forever, like the response to that and like the developmental loss that occurred during that. Because, people were kind of, those really important developmental times, those students were like, didn't get to go to prom, didn't get to do all these kinds of things. And I'm starting to see things going back to normal. It seems like people are really like yearning for like that connection and all that, but there's like still some like social anxiety. I've noticed a lot of people with trouble making friends, reaching out. That's what I'm seeing a lot of, and that's what my staff's telling me a lot about.
Okay.
So I think there's still some, I know some people might be like still, but I think still people are still having a little bit of impacts from that.
Right. And you mentioned the pandemic. One thing that when I talk to audiences, they are always super surprised that in 2020, that was like a low point for us suicide rate wise. And then it started going back up again.
That shocked me too. When I looked at the chart, it went like, it's just like that. And now we're at an all-time high again.
Yeah, we're back at an all-time high. So do you, like, from a mental health provider perspective, what do you think that we might be able to attribute that to? I know it's not research.
I did not do any research.
This is a conjecture.
I have no idea. The only thing I can assume is that even though people were stressed about the COVID and stuff like that, a lot of us were like at home, and for most of us, that's a safe space, and didn't have a lot of the stresses of having to go to work, logistical stuff. So maybe life, in some ways, things were harder, but in other ways, things were easier. And we were with our family more. But I'm just guessing. I would have no idea.
Same. I'm also guessing.
I'd be curious to hear why that happened, because I would have thought the opposite. I thought people would be more isolated.
Right. That's what everybody thought.
You'd be locked up in your room, and that would make depression worse. So,
right. That's what so many people were thinking was going to be the case. And then, like we said, we saw a dip, and then it started creeping back up. And like you said, we're at an all-time high right now. I have a theory, if you care to hear what my theory is. My theory is in 2020, it was like, okay, we're going through this global pandemic. We don't know what's going on. We don't know when this is going to end. We're all just doing our best to keep each other safe. And it was like almost a sense of community in crisis. And like, we might be isolated and more depressed at home, but we know we're not the only ones going through that. And there was a little bit of community that went with that, right?
Yeah.
And then
like we're trauma bonding.
Yeah, trauma bonding. Yeah. And so it was like, okay, well, finally other people are feeling what I feel. And then, you know, from a work perspective, you mentioned work. If you had the sniffles in 2020 and you called your boss to be like, hey, stay home, we got paid leave for you, please don't come. Like,
all
take
of a sudden,
care
like
of yourself.
Self-care and all that's like super important.
It was like, all the stuff we've been preaching for a long time. We were like holding people accountable to actually care for themselves. And then it's like, nope, we're back to normal. I don't put on a mask, get to work, you know? And so it's like, to me, it was like a cultural shift. And then it was like, we forgot everything we learned. And people are now feeling more and more isolated now because they feel like they're back in that I'm the only person that's going through this. Don't know how to reach out for help. Other people not noticing. I think masking, is that something that you're seeing with your college students or your colleagues? Is the when
they're sick,
no, I'm talking about like when they're masking. I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought you were talking about that
COVID
kind of
masking. I have switched topics and I didn't alert you. When they're going through like depression or, you know, bouts of mental health issues, are y'all seeing more students masking that and not letting people know?
That's always been the case, I feel like.
Really?
But that theory that you suggested, that's interesting. We need to get this lady a grant.
We need to research it.
All
right. So, well, let's talk about your research then. So I know when we also went to the same doctoral program, and do you remember that semester that kind of got me into suicide really intently when we lost so many students that one
2012? Semester? I'll never forget 2012.
Yeah, that
changed the trajectory of this office.
It did,
everything. Yeah. We used to be counseling and career planning, and then after that, we're like, we have to put all resources, all hands on deck towards counseling, and that everything. I think that was like a pivotal moment in the growth of our department because it completely changed us. But please, I didn't mean that.
No, you're good. I agree. That was a really hard time. We had a very sharp influx in suicidal ideations and attempts.
14 attempts. If I remember correctly, that y'all knew about. On top of the ones that we were already doing, and that's when it was like becoming like public. Like this is a major issue.
So that semester, I was working on a dissertation topic that was very boring. It was related to what I was doing as a professional, but it was horrible. And so we had that semester, and I kind of took that as my opportunity to research college students and their suicidal behaviors and how faculty members specifically could help. Yours was rooted in masculinity and was it help-seeking behaviors?
That's correct.
Okay, so tell me just a little bit about your research.
It's only going to be a little bit because I haven't looked at that in a while. That was a while ago. But something similar. I remember when I was talking to the folks before us that graduated. Because I went and get their advice before I started the program. They all said the same thing: is like, don't wait till the last minute. To pick a topic, and then also try to find a topic that you're interested in that's going to keep your interest. Don't the thing that you said was boring. Don't do something like that, because you're gonna be living in this thing for a couple of years. So it has to at least pique your interest enough to where you're able to crack open that book and get into it. and I knew it had to be. So I knew it had to be mental health.
Yeah.
And funnier enough, it was like a little like viral video that got me into my topic. Yeah, I don't know if you remember. It was viral at the time. This was a long time ago. It was this like this little African American boy, and he was going to get a shot at the doctor, and he had his shirt off. He was just sitting there, and then the doctor's giving him a shot, and the boy's like holding back tears, and then he gets up and like holding back tears, like I'm a man, like being, and it was like so cute and funny. It was put on all kinds of shows. It was kind of funny, but like deep down, and then the dad was like consoling him and all, like, yeah, you're tough. And then the boy eventually starts crying because the shot hurt too much. But I'm like, whoa, why is that funny or weird? Or why is that going viral?
Yeah.
And then that led me down the road of like how masculinity and societal pressures create stigma. Because that boy was at such a young age getting trained to be like, you have to be tough. You could never show weakness. You have to be strong.
Right.
And everyone's like applauding that and thinking it's great. But the comments had a mixed review. But that really got me thinking, like, all the time I spent in mental health, I guess I never put the 2 and 2 together. Mm-hmm. Then I started looking into like our office, and like, oh wow, we have a 3-to-1 ratio of clients, female to male.
Okay.
And it just got me thinking down that path. And then there's like this whole body of literature that I just did not understand. And that got me going into masculinity, traditional masculinity. Mental health literacy, which is just recognizing, understanding, and being able to address mental health issues in yourself and others. And the final one is stigma, which is what it sounds like. Right. Shame when it comes to mental health.
Right. And so just a Reader's Digest version of that. What does the research show around masculinity and I guess help-seeking behaviors? Or
so, I'm sure women probably feel some sort of pressure from society to look a certain way. I think men have similar societal pressures that are put on them to act a certain way or to present a certain way. And that's, when you think of masculinity, or it's called Western masculinity or hegemonic masculinity, it's being tough, stoic, independent, financially successful, a winner, not overly emotional. And my research had bared it out. Like, a lot of the men I was interviewing and talking to told me that they very much felt that pressure. Like they shouldn't be talking about their emotions. They don't need to be perceived as weak or feminine or something like that by talking about their problems. And they would do the other kind of masking that you were telling me. That's one of the ways that they would interact with the world, to show that I'm strong, I'm masculine, I have value.
Okay. So, my platform, I am all about help-seeking behaviors, and I want to be very clear on that. I have to continuously say I'm all about help-seeking behaviors. I don't want to minimize that at all. But from the work that I do and what I see this missing link of sometimes, like I will liken it to some sort of physical illness. Let's say I have diabetes or something and I pass out in here. You're not going to tell me, should have probably watched out for that insulin, huh? Like you're gonna go into action and you're gonna start helping me.
Exactly.
And mental illness, I mean, it's just an illness that affects the brain, just like diabetes affects the pancreas, this affects the brain. And so I don't like that the majority of what we see out for suicide prevention, I don't like that we see the majority of it is, well, you need to reach out for help, make sure to reach out for help. If I'm passed out from a diabetic coma, I can't reach out for help. Somebody else needs to help me. And I feel like it's the same kind of thing with mental health. And so when you're looking at that through that lens, let's say, people listening, they have somebody in their life, a man in their life that they're worried about that may be going through something mental health related. We know based on the research that there's additional stigma and societal pressure that they have to overcome in order to be able to reach out for help, right? So, as your role as an expert in this arena, what advice would you give just the average Joe out there if they're worried about somebody in their life? What would you suggest that they do?
The thing that I saw and continue to see is you have to talk with them, but you have to so it's not that men can't do these things. That's
Right.
what I think I learned in my research. It's not that men don't have mental health literacy, or that they don't know how to handle emotions, or they don't know how to handle mental health. They know how to do that. What they're worried, they're scared about being perceived a certain way. So if you come to them in a kind of way like, because what they're worried about is like, if I tell you, you're going to run and tell everyone else, then that'll diminish my. It's like kind of like a kind of like a currency. If I give too much of this away, I'm losing masculinity. So you got to make them feel like you can tell me this, and I'm not going to go gossip behind you. I'm not, because a lot of these men, when I were interviewing them, they've tried that before, and the information got out. People were gossiping behind their back. People were making fun of them. They're worried about getting ridiculed. So if you can do it in a way to make them feel like, that's not what I want to do. I actually care about you. I want to get you some help.
Yeah.
But that can't happen at a one-off. Like you have to.
You got to build the trust.
You got to build that trust over time.
Okay. So that's the biggest barrier that you're seeing, is that overcoming that barrier to trust, and like, okay, this is somebody I can actually talk to.
Exactly. Okay. And that was like one of the themes that kept coming up, is like relatability. Men would really like to talk to other people that they could relate, that they feel like they could relate to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
it doesn't necessarily have to be another man or someone with the same race, because I asked those questions.
Yeah.
Just someone that can I know something about the problem. Like, it's not just because men seem to, instead of wanting to just talk about it, they want solutions. So if you kind of if you package things a certain way, it's more consumable, it's more palatable to men.
Gotcha. Okay.
One thing that one study found, and I wish I would have thought of this, is actually using those traditional masculinity norms or stereotypes that I told you about, the traits like strength.
Yeah.
They actually used those strengths and connected them to like pro mental health literacy stuff. So it's like, you're a man, right? You need to be responsible, right? Well, someone that's responsible will get help when they need it.
Yeah.
Or it's a sign of strength to overcome your shame and be vulnerable and talk about using that language, like kind of like, CNN or Fox or something like that, they spin it to whatever narrative. It's the same story, but they're going to say it however whatever fits their narrative. Why don't we do the same thing? Because what I also learned is masculinity is a construct. It's something we as a society create that, so we can shape it, and it changes. Right, at one point, a man wouldn't be caught wearing pink, but now it's okay.
Right.
And then actually, a long time ago, pink was for boys. So all that stuff's constantly changing.
Right.
So why can't we change it together?
Yeah. I use a similar analogy when I'm talking. It's like, I want to change the culture around suicide prevention. I want us to look out for each other and actually like stop saying things like, well, if you need anything, let me know, and get up in there and actually start helping and being there and checking in and stuff like that. And talking about changing the culture, I talk about Jesse Stamos and the Jesse and the Rippers on Full House, and he had a mullet, and then it was like, somehow, somewhere, the mullet took off. It was this whole cultural phenomenon. One person somewhere started that, right? Like and
apparently there's like different categories of mullet too. It's not like, like it's like a whole thing.
It's a whole
now.
Cultural phenomenon now. Now it's back ironically, and it's like, okay, well, somebody made that decision at some point and changed the culture. Why can't we do it for something as helpful as making people feel loved and less alone in the earth? Like, obviously, I'm very passionate about that. One thing I did want to have you talk about too, and when you're talking about bringing down those barriers and reaching people where they are, you are, whether you know it or not, famous for doing the walk and talks on campus, where you can have your session with you in your office, or y'all can go walk and be out and about. Is there a strategy with that? Can you talk a little bit more about that and how it makes counseling a little bit more accessible to people?
I think when you're moving or doing something, and maybe I got this from play therapy, your inhibitions are low. I find that especially with males who it's hard for them to open up. When you are like walking and talking, it doesn't become about like sitting around just talking about your feelings. It's just the conversation starts flowing.
Yeah.
They're not just like thinking about what they're going to say.
Yeah.
We're just walking and moving and talk, and it just comes out naturally. So there is a little strategy behind that. And plus movement, physical health and mental health are connected. Like you said, the whole brain thing, and when you gave the diabetes example, and I feel like these things are very much intertwined and connected. You want to have a healthy mind and you want to have a healthy body,
right?
So just modeling good behavior, or like killing two birds with one stone kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. That's one thing when I worked on campus, I would always have a little giggle whenever I would look out my window and then there goes Assadi, and he's either walking with another counselor, he's walking with a student. And it was just like, yep, he's got his thing down. To me, that's a good strategy for anybody to use, though, especially if you're trying to get somebody to open up and talk. If you're talking with someone who enjoys getting out or being out and the walking or active, tossing a ball, swimming, whatever it is, anything to get the brain kind of going and those inhibitions lowered so that you can have a real conversation. That works with a lot of different kinds of people, but especially if you're worried about somebody who is worried about their masculinity or something like that, and being vulnerable. It brings down those barriers. I've always really admired that about you and how you did your work.
That's literally meeting someone where they're at. Because some people, it takes a lot of courage to open that front door and come in, because you have to be seen coming into the clinic.
Yeah.
So I'm like, we'll take the clinic wherever we have to take it. You know, we have satellites everywhere now using that model. So we're at the law school, we're at the Clinton school, and we're just literally going to where they're at. Because sitting around and waiting, that's what led us to that 12 attempts. And I know after that, we're like, never again. That was unacceptable. I still think about that and talk about that. That was unacceptable to have that many.
It spurred so much good, as in the work that you do. It spurred my dissertation. It spurred my movement, essentially. I mean, I don't want to say nothing good came of it, but man, do I wish that would have never happened at the same time.
Exactly.
Because that was such a painful time, especially for those of us who were the caretakers of the campus.
And well, we shouldn't have to take it personally, but
it felt like we failed.
That's how I felt too. I still, whenever we hear of an attempt or something, like, man, I wish I would have done this, or how about even if they weren't a client, it's like, well, how could we have reached them, or how could we have gotten to our office?
Yeah. And you bring up a good point too, but I do want to hear, I just did an episode on survivor's guilt. When you lose somebody to suicide.
I reviewed some of your, to prepare for this. I listened to some, did some homework.
But from a counselor's perspective, I know you've had to have met with people who have lost somebody and they were going through that same guilt. What are some things that you tell them to help them make peace with it, I guess?
Well, I'm sure the same stuff you would have told them. It's not your fault. You didn't control that. In hindsight, it's so easy to say. Yeah. I mean, I could make the same argument. I wish I would have bought Bitcoin. Like, it's so easy to say what you would have done when you have all the information. It's a way. I think it's like a psychological spank. Like, you don't want that to happen again, so you like punish yourself to hopefully like I'll do better next time. So, but it's not doing anything. You're just hurting yourself.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, you have to admit I wasn't in control.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, I think. Do you have any parting wisdom for just anyone in general who's out there worried about somebody? Specifically, I know I'm talking to you about men in general, but anything that you would want them to remember when they're trying to help or trying to get them to get help?
This is going to be weird coming from me because it goes against my training, but like, I love it. It's like we were taught not to disclose too much. Yeah. Which obviously, if you came to a therapy session with me and I'm like, well, let me tell you about my life first, before that's going to be off-putting, right? So I understand where that comes from. We want to protect the client. Everything needs to be beneficial to the client. So outside of the therapeutic setting, I think there's a lot of good and I'm learning that through my association with the Lived Experiences Advisory Committee that I'm on under the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. There's a lot of power in like lived experience, like the work you're doing, like telling our stories, because that like normalizes it. And we learn from each other, but it has to be done in a safe way. You can't, you don't want to sensationalize this stuff. We actually had someone come do one of our research connections that we do, and they were talking about messaging when it comes to suicide. You got to be careful. Like, instead of saying committed suicide, we got to be careful how we phrase certain things, because at the end of the day, we want to do no harm. And I would advise people out there, whoever's listening, is don't be scared to tell your story. If you see someone struggling, go talk to them. There's still that myth, like, oh, I'm gonna put that idea in their head if I talk to them or something like that. The more we talk about this, the more conversations we have, the better. And I was had issues with it at first too. I remember when we first started, after the 2012 issue. We're like, should we do programming? I mean, suicide's kind of like a bummer. Like, who's going to come to a suicide prevention?
Right.
Anything labeled suicide, anything.
Right.
Or who's going to come to something like that? Well, we had 60 people show up to our research.
Yeah.
People do want to have this
They
conversation. We just have to create an environment where it's safe to talk about it.
Yeah.
And we have to do it with best practices.
Yeah.
So learn how to do that and then tell your story and get connected. And I like the idea, like go talk to people.
Yeah. If they won't come to you, go to them.
Meet them where they're at.
Yeah. Meet them where they're at.
And you cannot make someone kill themselves by talking about it. I can't stress that enough. Go talk about it. You'll be surprised of the interaction and engagement you'll get if you do so.
So on that topic, I know I said I was going to wrap it up, but I'm not. I maybe we can rapid fire here. But what are the two biggest myths when it comes to suicide that you see?
For sure, the one I just said, like talking about it will make someone
want to do it more. That's a myth.
That is a myth.
I want to be very clear. That is a myth.
that is for sure a myth. I don't know if you didn't put me on the spot, I could probably think of another one.
Okay,
let me come back to that.
You said one, so I'll say one. That anybody who is actually suicidal isn't going to tell you about it anyway. They're just going to go do it.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Oh yeah,
nothing gets me fired up faster than that one. I'm like,
I don't know if it's controversial, but I think most suicides are preventable.
Yeah, I do too.
For sure.
I do too.
You'd be surprised, and the littlest thing you hear. I've heard so many stories. Like someone said hi to me or smiled at me.
I had one here.
That by itself, something that was so trivial, like that would stop.
I had one here. I was walking down, and y'all aren't on campus, so you don't know what I'm talking about. But I was walking down the hill, and I saw a student. I don't even remember this interaction. It was a few months later. They came out. It was when I was director of housing, and they came in and they said, "Ms. Ricky, can I talk for a second?" And I was like, "Sure." And so they came in and asked me if I remembered that day that I think I asked him how classes were doing. I think that's what he told me. I did. And he was walking that way, and he was going to the parking garage. He told me his plan was to go to the parking garage and jump off the top of the parking garage. But I stopped and had a conversation with him, and he didn't tell me he was depressed in that or anything. It was just a, "Hey, how are you?" And I had a genuine, like maybe 2-minute conversation with him. And he was like, I turned around and went to the counseling office after we left, and I made an appointment with the counselor. Something so small.
Yeah, think about the lows you have to be experiencing, because that goes against our evolution. Like we're, our bodies and brains are here to try to keep us alive,
right?
Keep us pushing forward so we can make more of us. You know, for that to be going haywire, there's some serious stuff going on. And there's like an epidemic of loneliness out there, especially young men. I see that out there, purposelessness or loneliness, and something as simple as a hi or how are you doing or a smile, you'd be surprised how far that would go.
Just, when somebody pops into your head, text them real fast and be like, "Hey, how are you doing? I'm just thinking about you." Little stuff like that can be life-changing. And it's little stuff like that too, where when people are talking about suicide prevention or like intervening with somebody or suicide, in their heads, I think they see some burly man with a gun in a room ready to take his life, and you've got to go in and disarm him. And it's just, that's not it. That's not what suicide intervention is. It's not what suicide prevention is.
So is suicide prevention just being a good, caring, considerate person?
Be kind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those are probably
I have one that thinking about it. The one I don't like is, they're just trying to get attention.
Oh yeah, they're trying to get attention.
Even if that's true, I'll even go along with that line of reasoning. Even if that's true, okay, they're having an issue, they need the attention. Let's get them the help. Let's talk to them about it.
I like to use the diabetes thing. It's like, we would never look at somebody who was passed out from diabetes and they're just looking for insulin.
Yeah, exactly.
We would help them. And so it's a legitimate medical issue, whether it's for attention or not. Who cares? We're not the judge and jury on that. We just are called upon to be human beings. It's kind of like when people say, don't give money to homeless people, they're just going to use it on alcohol or drugs or whatever. And it's like, I have no power over what if I give them something.
Mm-hmm.
It's on them what they do with it.
Exactly.
So yeah. It has been so lovely talking to you and catching up. Thank you so much for taking time to do this. It's always fun to catch up with an old buddy,
Mm-hmm.
Not old, seasoned.
Well, I am getting a little up there. I have a lot more grays in my beard than last time you met me, or last time you saw me.
Yeah. But anyway, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for giving us a platform.
Yeah. I'm so thankful for my friend for having this interview today. I hope you learned a lot about it as well. I'd love to hear from the men today. Leave a comment or voice memo and let us know how you feel best supported by your loved ones when you are struggling with mental health. What is something they can do to help you open up when you are going through hard times? Do you want to join the movement to end suicide? I have included a link to volunteer for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. You can write letters for policy changes, volunteer at a local event, join a local chapter, or more. There's so many ways to get involved, but this is a great organization to get involved with, and I am plugging it here because Dr. A is on the board for the Arkansas chapter. So it's a great way to get involved if you're looking to make your stamp on the suicide prevention space. In next week's episode, I'm turning one of my most viral TikToks into a whole episode. We are discussing my top 5 things I would do if someone I knew was suicidal. So don't miss next week's episode where we continue to learn how to intervene with ease.